The morning started like any other Tuesday on Earth, until the sky filled with alien ships. Sarah was drinking coffee in her office when her aide burst through the door. "Madam President, you need to see this immediately." The screen showed what looked like metal mountains floating above major cities worldwide. 500 massive ships hung in Earth's atmosphere, each one larger than any building humanity had ever constructed. They cast shadows that turned day into twilight across entire continents. General pointed at the tactical display. They appeared simultaneously at 800 hours. No warning, no detection by our sensors until they were already here. We estimate each ship is at least 10 kilometers long. President stared at the images flooding in from around the globe. The ships were beautiful in a terrifying way, with smooth curves and surfaces that seemed to bend light around them. But it was their sheer size that made her stomach drop. Earth's entire space fleet could fit inside just one of these vessels. "Any communication attempts?" she asked. "None from our side yet, but ma'am, they're broadcasting on all frequencies. The message is simple." The main screen flickered, showing a being that was clearly not human. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, with pale blue skin and 4 arms. Its face was angular, with large black eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. When it spoke, the words came through in perfect English, though its mouth movements didn't match the sounds. "People of Earth, I am Admiral of the Oran Empire. Your world has been selected for integration into our domain. This is not a request. This is reality." The alien's voice was calm, almost bored, as if this was something it had done many times before. "You have 72 of your hours to surrender completely. Your governments will dissolve. Your military forces will be disbanded. 40% of your planetary resources will be delivered to us annually. Your population will be relocated to designated work zones where you will serve the Empire." President felt her hands clench into fists. Around the Situation Room, she could see the same anger reflected in every face. The alien continued. "We have conquered over 2,000 star systems. We have integrated 400 species into our empire. Resistance is pointless and will only result in unnecessary death. Accept your new role, and your species will be allowed to continue existing." The transmission cut off, leaving the room in heavy silence. Defense Secretary Williams was the first to speak. "What do we know about these Orans?" Intelligence Director Foster opened a thick folder. "We've been tracking alien radio signals for 60 years. Most of what we know about galactic civilization comes from intercepted communications. The Oran Empire is massive. They control roughly a quarter of this galactic arm." "How do they fight?" General asked. "From what we've gathered, they use energy weapons, force shields, and overwhelming numbers. Most species surrender after the first demonstration of their power. Those that don't, well, their planets tend to go silent permanently." President walked to the window. Looking up at the alien ship, hovering over Washington, D.C., she had been preparing for this moment her entire political career. Ever since she was a young senator on the Defense Committee, when the first alien signals were decoded. "Options?" she asked. "Surrender," Secretary Williams said quietly. "Their technology is clearly centuries ahead of ours. Our weapons might not even scratch their hulls." "Fight," General countered, "and likely face extinction." "There's a third option," Director Foster said. Everyone turned to look at her. "We've been preparing for this day for decades. Project Prometheus." President nodded slowly. Project Prometheus was humanity's deepest secret. For 50 years, every advance in human technology had been guided by one question: how could it be used against a superior alien force? "The gravitational weapon platforms are operational?" she asked. "All 43 of them, hidden in what appears to be space debris throughout the solar system. Our ships have been equipped with the new drives. Our soldiers have been training for boarding actions against larger vessels. But ma'am," Foster paused, Even with all our preparations, the odds are not good. What about the other preparations? The liberation protocols are ready. If we can capture even one of their ships intact, our hackers believe they can crack their communication networks. We have biological agents designed specifically for the Iran physiology based on genetic samples from that crashed probe 5 years ago. Admiral Hayes, head of the Space Force, spoke up. Our people know the plan. Every ship captain, every station commander. If we choose to fight, they'll fight, no matter the cost. President turned back to the room. She thought about her daughter, sleeping safely in the White House bunker. She thought about the millions of children around the world who would grow up as slaves if humanity bowed down now. We've had this conversation before, she said. In theory, now it's real. Do we kneel or do we stand? The room was quiet for a long moment. Then General spoke. Ma'am, I've read every report about the species that surrendered to the Empire. They're worked to death in mining operations. Their children are taken and raised as servants. Their cultures are erased. That's not survival. That's just a slower form of death. The question isn't whether we can win, Admiral Hayes added. The question is whether we can live with ourselves if we don't try. President looked at each person in the room. These were the leaders of humanity's military and intelligence services. They knew better than anyone how hopeless the odds were, and yet, in every face, she saw the same determination. Draft a response, she ordered. Keep it simple. 30 minutes later, President sat before the cameras. Behind her stood the flags of every Earth nation, united for perhaps the first time in human history. Admiral, she began, looking directly into the camera, you asked for Earth's surrender. Our answer is no. She paused, letting the weight of that single word sink in. Humanity has never bowed to tyrants. We will not start today. If you want our world, you'll have to take it. The transmission lasted exactly 30 seconds. Around the world, human military forces began moving to their positions. In space, hidden weapon platforms powered up for the first time. On the ground, every major city activated defense systems that had been secretly constructed over decades. Admiral received the human response while reviewing deployment plans for what he expected to be a simple occupation. The brevity surprised him. Most species either begged for mercy or tried to negotiate. Humans had done neither. He studied the small being on his screen, so tiny compared to Iran, yet there was something in her eyes that made him pause. In 800 years of conquest, the Empire had learned to recognize when a species would fight to the death. Usually, it was desperation. But President's expression wasn't desperate, it was determined. Admiral gave the order to begin the demonstration bombardment. Sydney, Australia had been selected as the target. The destruction of one city would surely break human resistance before it could begin. He had no idea that humanity's real response was just beginning. Admiral expected the bombardment of Sydney to last exactly 17 minutes. That was how long it typically took to reduce a major population center to ash, sending a clear message to any watching species about the cost of defiance. Instead, the bombardment lasted 3 hours and cost him 73 ships. The attack began normally. 12 Iran destroyers broke formation and descended toward Earth's atmosphere, their energy cannons charging for the demonstration strike. Admiral watched from his flagship, already composing the surrender demand he would send once the humans saw their city burn. That's when space around his fleet exploded with weapons fire. Contacts emerging, his tactical officer screamed, unknown vessels bearing everywhere. What had appeared to be simple space debris suddenly revealed itself as a network of hidden weapons platforms. Massive installations that had been disguised as asteroids and scrap metal now unfolded like deadly flowers, bristling with cannons unlike anything in the Empire's database. The first gravitational lance struck the destroyer Conquest's edge amidships. The beam, invisible to normal sensors, passed through the ship's shields as if they didn't exist. The destroyer simply folded in on itself, its hull crumpling like paper around a point of infinite density. "Impossible," whispered. Gravitational weaponry was theoretical. No species had ever successfully deployed it. "Admiral, the humans are using gravity as a weapon," his science officer reported, his voice shaking. "Our shields are completely ineffective against gravitational distortion." More lances struck home. The eternal glory lasted longer than the first destroyer, its crew screaming emergency reports before the ship collapsed into a sphere of compressed metal barely 10 meters across. The Iron Will tried to retreat, but couldn't escape the invisible beam that caught it halfway through its turn. "Return fire," ordered. "Destroy those platforms." The Empire's energy cannons lit up space with brilliant streams of plasma. Several weapons platforms exploded under the barrage, but for every one destroyed, two more seemed to appear from behind carefully positioned debris fields. Then the human ships arrived. Captain Maria Santos of the UES Defiance led the first wave. Her ship was tiny compared to the Iran vessels, barely 100 meters long against their kilometer-plus warships, but size meant nothing when physics became your weapon. "All ships execute pattern Omega," she broadcast on the encrypted channel. Around her, 11 other human vessels acknowledged the order. The squadron vanished. "Where did they go?" demanded. His sensors showed nothing but empty space where the human ships had been. "Admiral, they've jumped to FTL," the tactical officer reported. "But the distances are impossible. They're making micro-jumps of less than 1,000 kilometers." FTL drives weren't meant for such precision. The power requirements should have been enormous, the calculations impossibly complex. Yet somehow the humans were using faster-than-light technology for short-range tactical movement. The human ships reappeared inside the Empire formation. Not near it, inside it. The Defiance materialized within the hangar bay of the dreadnought Galactic Dominion. Santos had exactly 15 seconds before the ship's internal defenses came online. She used every one of them. "For Earth," she screamed, triggering the Defiance reactor overload. The explosion tore the dreadnought apart from within. A ship that had conquered 17 star systems died in a ball of nuclear fire, taking its entire crew and one human captain who had volunteered for a suicide mission without hesitation. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human ships appeared inside Iran vessels like deadly ghosts, their crews detonating their reactors in acts of sacrifice that left the Empire's officers stunned. In the Empire's long history of conquest, no species had ever deliberately destroyed their own ships to damage the enemy. "Admiral, we need to withdraw," the tactical officer pleaded. "They're inside our formation. Our ships can't fire without hitting each other." But Admiral was learning that humans had more surprises. The remaining human vessels weren't just using kamikaze attacks. They were fighting with a viciousness that understanding. Commander Jack's squadron engaged 3 Iran cruisers simultaneously. His ships, Revenge, Liberty, and New York, were outnumbered and by any rational measure, didn't care about rational measures. "Target their communication arrays," he ordered, "then close to boarding range." "Sir, boarding range against ships that size is suicide," his weapons officer protested. "Son, we're already dead," replied calmly. "The question is how many of them we take with us." The human ships closed distance using unpredictable flight patterns that made targeting difficult. When the Iran cruiser Eternal Victory tried to bring its main guns to bear, the Revenge performed a maneuver that should have torn it apart, a 90-degree turn at full acceleration, using gravitational manipulation to ignore basic physics. The Revenge slammed into the Eternal Victory's hangar bay, its reinforced prow punching through the alien ship's hull. Human Marines poured through the breach before the Orans could seal the damage. What followed was the Empire's first taste of human ground combat. Staff Sergeant led the boarding party into corridors filled with confused aliens. The Orans were taller and stronger than humans, but they had never faced an enemy that refused to retreat. "Remember, we're not trying to capture the ship," shouted over the sound of plasma fire. "We're here to break things." The human Marines moved through the alien vessel like a plague. They didn't follow standard boarding protocols because there were no standard protocols for what they were doing. Instead of trying to take control rooms or capture officers, they simply destroyed everything they could reach. Private used explosive charges to wreck the ship's gravity generators. Corporal Williams emptied his entire ammunition supply into the main computer core. Lieutenant Torres led a team to the engineering section and began systematically sabotaging the FTL drive. The Orans fought back, but their training emphasized capturing enemies alive for interrogation. The humans had no such restrictions. Every human soldier carried a dead man's switch that would detonate a small explosive charge if they were killed or incapacitated. When Oran security forces tried to stun the human intruders, the unconscious Marines simply exploded. "What manner of creatures are these?" the ship's captain transmitted to Admiral before the Eternal Victory lost power and began drifting helplessly. Admiral had no answer. In 3 hours of combat, he had lost more ships than in the previous 5 years of expansion. The humans had used weapons and tactics that shouldn't exist, fought with a determination that logic, and displayed a willingness to die that terrified his officers. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "We withdraw to the edge of the system." "Admiral, the Emperor will demand an explanation," his communications officer warned. Looked at the tactical display showing the burning wreckage of 73 Imperial ships. In return, they had destroyed 122 human vessels. By any military standard, the Empire had won. So why did it feel like a defeat? "Tell the Emperor that these humans fight differently than any species we've encountered," he said finally. "They don't seem to understand that they're supposed to surrender when outmatched." As the Imperial fleet retreated, emergency channels across Earth crackled with activity. The human losses had been severe, but the message was clear. The mighty Oran Empire could bleed. In bunkers and command centers around the world, human leaders began implementing the next phase of their desperate plan. The first battle was over, but the war was just beginning. Admiral sent his report to the Emperor, recommending immediate reinforcement of the sector. He had the uncomfortable feeling that he had just made a terrible mistake. The humans weren't behaving like any conquered species in Imperial history. They were acting like they intended to win. And that was impossible, wasn't it? Emperor read Admiral's report 3 times before he believed it. 73 ships lost to a primitive species that barely had space flight. It was impossible, yet the sensor logs didn't lie. "Gravitational weapons," he asked his science council. "The humans have developed gravitational weapons." High Researcher Horn, the Empire's leading physicist, shifted nervously. "The technology is theoretically possible, Your Excellence, but the power requirements should have been beyond any species at their development level." "Yet they used them." "Yes, Your Excellence, and their micro-FTL capability. We've been trying to develop precision short-range jumps for 2 centuries. They seem to have mastered it." Emperor stood from his throne, his 4 arms clasped behind his back. The Oran Empire had ruled most of this galactic arm for 800 years. No single species had ever challenged them successfully. "Send the 3rd Battle Fleet," he ordered. 2,000 ships under War Prince, or I want this human infestation ended. "Your Excellence," Horn ventured carefully, "perhaps we should study their technology first, learn how they develop such weapons." The Emperor's black eyes turned cold. "The humans will serve the Empire or they will die. There is no third option." 3 weeks after the first battle, War Prince or arrived at Earth's solar system with overwhelming force. His flagship, the Imperial Wrath, was 5 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Behind it came 2,000 of the Empire's finest warships. "Father wants no survivors this time," he told his fleet commanders. "We burned the entire system clean." But Earth looked different than the intelligence reports suggested. Where there had been empty space 3 weeks ago, now there were structures. Massive installations floated throughout the asteroid belt, connected by what appeared to be transport tubes. It looked like humanity had been building for years, not weeks. "Prince, we're detecting massive energy signatures throughout the system," his tactical officer reported. "It appears the humans have fortified the entire asteroid belt." Or studied the sensor readings with growing unease. How is this possible? They couldn't have built all this in 3 weeks. What he didn't know was that humanity had been preparing for this exact scenario since the first alien signals were detected 60 years ago. Every asteroid mining operation had been a cover for weapons construction. Every space station had been designed with hidden military capabilities. Humanity had turned their entire solar system into a fortress. "Prince, incoming transmission from the human leadership," the communications officer announced. President appeared on screen, but she looked different than in the first battle. Her clothes were military fatigues instead of a business suit, and behind her stood representatives from every Earth nation. More importantly, she wasn't alone. Beside her stood beings that made Or's blood run cold. "War Prince Or began, we've been expecting you, but as you can see, we've made some new friends." The alien beings beside her were clearly Oran, but they wore human military insignia. Prisoners who had been turned. Impossible. Orans would die before betraying the Empire. "Allow me to introduce Captain," continued, gesturing to one of the aliens. "He was the commander of the destroyer Conquest's Edge before your admiral's forces destroyed it. Fortunately, we were able to rescue him and 43 of his crew." Captain stepped forward. When he spoke, it was in perfect Oran, but his words were broadcast on all Imperial frequencies. "Brothers, I have seen the truth," he said. "The humans fight not for conquest, but for freedom. They saved my life when they had every reason to kill me. They tended our wounded when they could have left us to die. This is not the behavior of primitives. This is the behavior of a superior civilization." Or felt his stomach drop. Propaganda was one thing, but this was a decorated imperial captain speaking against the Empire. "The Emperor calls them slaves," continued. "But who are the real slaves? We who serve an empire that destroys entire species for refusing to kneel. Or these humans who fight for the right of all beings to be free?" "Enough," Or shouted, cutting the transmission. "Is obviously under some form of mind control. Begin the attack." The Second Battle of Earth began among the asteroids of humanity's home system. This time, humans had learned from captured Imperial technology. Their ships now mounted crude but effective energy shields, reverse-engineered from Oran designs. More importantly, they had learned to combine Imperial technology with uniquely human innovations. Commander Lisa Park led the first human squadron into battle aboard the Terra Rising. Her ship looked like a hybrid of human and alien design, bristling with both gravitational weapons and captured Imperial plasma cannons. "All ships execute pattern Delta," she ordered. The human fleet scattered throughout the asteroid belt, using the massive rocks as cover and concealment. But these weren't just hiding places, they were weapons. The first asteroid impactor hit the Imperial cruiser Galactic Revenge at 30% of light speed. The rock had been fitted with FTL engines and guidance systems, turning it into a guided missile the size of a mountain. The cruiser's shields flared and died, and the ship simply vanished in a burst of vaporized metal. "They're using asteroids as weapons," the tactical officer screamed. "Hundreds of them." War Prince Or watched in horror as his formation was bombarded by rocks moving at impossible speeds. The humans had turned every asteroid in the belt into a potential projectile, and their gravitational weapons were accelerating them to velocities that made them unstoppable. But the humans had more surprises. The Terra Rising launched something new: clouds of microscopic machines that spread through space like silver fog. When the nanobots reached Imperial ships, they began disassembling them at the molecular level, turning hull plating into dust and circuit boards into scrap. Biological weapons, another officer reported. The humans are using biological weapons. Captain Torres of the New Angels had released modified Earth bacteria into space, carried in specially designed pods that could survive in vacuum. The bacteria were harmless to humans, but deadly to Oran physiology. Imperial crews began collapsing at their stations as alien pathogens overwhelmed their immune systems. "This is barbaric," or protested. "Biological weapons are forbidden by galactic law." His aide looked at him with confusion. "Prince, we've never acknowledged galactic law. We are the galactic law." The battle became a nightmare of technological terror. Humans used every advantage they could think of, combining captured alien technology with weapons the Empire had never conceived of. Ships that appeared destroyed suddenly revealed themselves as decoys packed with explosives. Human boarding parties carried weapons that fired concentrated acid, melting through Imperial armor like it was paper. But the worst part was the human boarding parties themselves. When the Terra Rising rammed into his dreadnought Dark Conquest, the human Marines who poured through the breach fought like nothing in Imperial experience. They didn't try to capture strategic locations or take prisoners. They simply fought to kill, using tactics that had no place in civilized warfare. Sergeant First Class Maria led her squad through corridors filled with smoke and plasma fire. When they encountered a Oran barricade, she didn't try to outflank it or call for heavy weapons. "Fix bayonets," she shouted. The humans charged directly into plasma fire, accepting casualties to close the distance. When they reached the barricade, the fighting became hand-to-hand. Orans were stronger and taller, but humans were faster and more vicious. More importantly, humans didn't stop when wounded. Private Jackson continued fighting with a plasma burn across his chest. Corporal Williams used his combat knife even after losing his rifle. Lieutenant Santos kept giving orders while bleeding from multiple wounds. The Orans broke and ran. "Impossible," Or whispered, watching his security forces retreat from a handful of human soldiers. "Orans do not retreat." "Prince, we should withdraw," his tactical officer pleaded. "We've lost over half the fleet." Or looked at the battle display. 1,200 Imperial ships had been reduced to fewer than 800 in 6 hours of fighting. The humans had lost more ships, but they seemed to have an endless supply of them. "How many ships do these humans have?" he demanded. "Prince, our intelligence may have been wrong. They appear to have converted their entire civilian fleet to military use. Cargo ships, passenger liners, even mining vessels are engaging our forces." As if to prove the point, a converted human cargo ship rammed into the cruiser Iron Fist, both ships exploding in a ball of nuclear fire. The cargo ship's crew had been 63 humans. The cruiser had carried 800 Orans. "They're trading ships at a ratio of 10-1, Or said. "How can they sustain losses like that?" His communications officer had been monitoring human radio traffic. "Prince, I think they're volunteers, all of them. They're not being ordered to die. They're choosing to." War Prince Or, son of an emperor who ruled 2,000 star systems, stared at the tactical display and felt something he had never experienced before: fear. These humans weren't fighting like any conquered species in Imperial history. They were fighting like they believed they could win. And after 6 hours of the worst military disaster in Imperial history, Or was beginning to think they might be right. The message arrived on Prime through channels the Empire didn't know existed, hidden in commercial shipping data, encoded in stellar navigation updates, and transmitted through supposedly dead communication satellites. The word spread across the enslaved world like wildfire. "This is Admiral Way of the Human Liberation Fleet. Your chains end today." Ara, an engineer who had spent her entire life in the crystal mines, looked up from her workstation as the transmission played through the mining facility's speakers. Around her, thousands of reptilian beings stopped their work, clawed hands trembling as they heard words they had never dared to dream. "The Iran Empire told us that resistance was impossible. They were wrong. We are bringing you weapons, technology, and something more important, hope." High above the planet's surface, human ships appeared in flashes of twisted space. But these weren't the crude vessels that had first fought the Empire 6 months ago. These ships were hybrids of human ingenuity and captured Imperial technology, painted with symbols that had begun appearing on walls throughout the Empire's slave worlds. A clenched fist surrounded by stars. The Free Worlds Alliance had been born. Admiral Way stood on the bridge of the Liberation, watching as transport pods descended toward Prime. Each pod contained portable shield generators, human-manufactured weapons, and most importantly, technical specifications that would allow them to build their own equipment. "Admiral, we're detecting Imperial patrol ships moving to intercept," her tactical officer reported. "Let them come," replied. "Time for another lesson." The Imperial patrol ships, 3 destroyers led by Captain, had been stationed at Prime for over a century. Their job was simple: keep the reptilian slaves working and crush any signs of rebellion. Captain had never lost a slave to uprising in 40 years of service. That was about to change. The human ships moved like nothing in Imperial tactical databases. They used micro-FTL jumps to appear behind the Imperial formation, then vanished before return fire could target them. When they attacked, it was with weapons that seemed to violate the laws of physics. The destroyer Slave Master simply folded in on itself when a gravitational lance struck its engine core. The Iron Chain tried to retreat, but human hackers had already infiltrated its computer systems, turning the ship's own weapons against its crew. The 3rd destroyer, Eternal Servitude, managed to send a distress call before human boarding parties overwhelmed its defenses. Captain found himself face to face with human Marines, led by Colonel Sarah Martinez, a small woman whose eyes burned with something he didn't understand. "You have enslaved an entire species for 400 years, she said quietly. "Now you get to see what freedom looks like." "The Empire will crush your pathetic rebellion," snarled. "You cannot fight the entire galaxy." "Watch us," Martinez replied. On the planet's surface, they were experiencing their first taste of freedom in 4 centuries. The portable shield generators provided by the humans made them nearly immune to Imperial energy weapons. The human weapons could punch through Iran armor like it was paper. But more important than the technology was the training. Sergeant Mike had volunteered for the Liberation mission despite having 3 children back on Earth. He now stood in a mine shaft teaching workers how to fight. "Your claws are natural weapons," he explained to Ara's work group. "Iran body armor isn't designed to stop slashing attacks. Get close, stay low, and use what evolution gave you." Ara looked at her claws, tools she had used for digging crystals her entire life. "We have never fought before," she said in broken English. "We do not know how to be warriors." "You've been fighting your whole life," replied. "Every day you survived under their rule was an act of rebellion. Now we're just changing the rules." The rebellion spread across Prime like a wildfire. Imperial garrison forces, designed to intimidate rather than fight, found themselves overwhelmed by millions of suddenly armed slaves. Though once considered among the most docile species in the Empire, revealed a ferocity that shocked their former masters. Word of the liberation reached other worlds through the human communication network that now spanned dozens of systems. On Hive Cluster 7, beings that had been treated as biological machines suddenly revealed their sentience when humans developed translation protocols for their chemical communications. The Hive Queen's first message to the Alliance was simple: "We remember, we hunger for justice." Captain led the Liberation Fleet to Hive Cluster 7, where she discovered something that made her stomach turn. The Imperial forces hadn't just enslaved the beings, they had been using them as living computers, plugging their brains directly into ship navigation systems. "How many?" she asked the ship's doctor after examining captured Imperial records. "Over 6 million beings used as biological processors," Doctor replied. "Their consciousness was suppressed but not destroyed. They've been aware the entire time." The liberation of the Hive clusters unleashed something the Empire had never faced, a species that thought and moved as a collective. Within hours of being freed, they had coordinated their rebellion across 17 star systems simultaneously. Imperial forces found themselves fighting enemies that shared a single, vast intelligence focused on one goal: revenge. But the human liberation campaign faced challenges beyond Imperial resistance. Some species had been enslaved for so long they didn't remember how to be free. Lieutenant Colonel David encountered this problem on the world of Servant Prime, where a species called the had served the Empire for over 1,000 years. When human forces arrived to liberate them, many of them begged them to leave. "We do not know how to live without masters," Elder In told through a translator. "The Empire provides food, shelter, purpose. What can you offer us?" Looked at the cowering beings before him, once proud, now broken by centuries of servitude. "The chance to find out who you really are," he said. It took weeks of patient work, but slowly they began to remember their heritage. Human teachers worked alongside freed and liberated Hive clusters to help them rebuild their culture. Each world that joined the Alliance became a beacon for others still under Imperial rule. Emperor watched his empire burn from his throne room on Orion Prime. The tactical display showed red markers throughout Imperial space worlds in rebellion, fleets under attack, communication networks compromised. "How many systems have we lost?" he demanded. 147 confirmed in rebellion, Excellence, his military advisor reported. Another 300 showing signs of unrest. "And the humans?" "They're everywhere, Excellence. Their ships appear, liberate a world, then vanish before our forces can respond. They're using technology we still don't understand, supported by species we thought were completely." "What about the Second Corps Fleet?" "Engaged with human forces at the Meridian Nebula. Admiral L reports they're fighting unlike any enemy we've ever faced. The humans use liberated species as shock troops while their own ships provide technological support. They're not trying to conquer territory, they're converting it." Emperor stood from his throne, his 4 arms clenched in rage. The empire that had taken 8 centuries to build was falling apart in less than a year, all because one small blue world had refused to surrender. "Prepare the core fleet," he ordered. "Every ship, every weapon, we end this at its source." "Excellent, that would leave Orion Prime defenseless." "The Empire dies if we don't stop these humans now. Better to risk everything than lose everything slowly." As the Emperor's orders went out, human intelligence networks intercepted them within hours. The Free Worlds Alliance now included over 200 liberated systems, each contributing ships, soldiers, and resources to the cause. Admiral Wei reviewed the intelligence report from her flagship, as the combined human and alien fleet prepared for what everyone knew would be the final battle. "The Empire's entire military force is moving toward Earth," her intelligence officer reported. "Every ship they have left." "How many?" "Conservative estimate, 8,000 ships." Around the bridge, Human and alien officers looked at each other nervously. The Alliance had perhaps 3,000 ships total, and many of them were converted civilian vessels crewed by volunteers with minimal training. "Ma'am," her tactical officer said quietly, "the odds aren't good." Admiral smiled grimly. "They never have been, but that's never stopped us before." She opened a channel to every ship in the fleet: human vessels, liberated cruisers, hive cluster bioships, and dozens of other designs from dozens of freed species. "This is Admiral Way. The Empire is coming to Earth with everything they have left. They think they can win by destroying They're wrong. We're not fighting for Earth anymore. We're fighting for every world, every species, every being that dreams of freedom." Throughout the fleet, beings of 100 different species prepared for the battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. The Empire was coming, but they weren't coming to fight humans anymore. They were coming to fight an idea. And ideas, as every tyrant in history had learned, were much harder to kill than planets. The battle for Sol began at dawn on Tuesday, exactly 1 year after the Empire first arrived at Earth. Emperor led the Imperial fleet personally aboard the super dreadnought Final Authority, a ship so massive it had its own gravity field. Behind him came 8,000 vessels representing the combined might of what had once been the greatest empire in galactic history. "Today we end this rebellion," he announced to his fleet. "Today we remind the galaxy why the Empire has ruled for 8 centuries. But as the Imperial Armada dropped out of FTL at the edge of Earth's solar system, realized that everything had changed. The space around Earth wasn't just fortified, it was alive with movement. Ships from hundreds of different worlds moved in complex patterns, their various technologies creating a symphony of defensive positions that stretched from Mercury's orbit to beyond Pluto. "Your Excellence," his tactical officer reported, voice trembling, "I count over 15,000 vessels. Human ships, cruisers, hive cluster bioships, and others, species I don't recognize." "Impossible," the Emperor whispered. "Our intelligence reported 3,000 ships at most." What Imperial intelligence hadn't understood was that the Free Worlds Alliance had been growing exponentially. Every liberated world brought new allies, and those allies brought their own freed allies. Species that hadn't been able to build warships under Imperial rule had spent the past year working around the clock to contribute to the Alliance fleet. Admiral Sarah stood on the bridge of the Terra victorious, watching the massive Imperial fleet approach. Around her stood officers from dozens of different species, united by a shared commitment to freedom. "All fleet commanders, this is Admiral," she broadcast on the Alliance frequency. "Today we're not just defending Earth, we're defending the idea that no being should kneel to another. Show them what the Alliance can do." The battle began with the largest exchange of fire in galactic history. Imperial plasma cannons lit up space with streams of superheated energy, while Alliance ships responded with a mixture of human gravitational weapons, crystal beam arrays, and hive cluster bioplasma. The space between the fleets became a web of deadly energy. But the real surprise came when the Imperial fleet tried to break through the Alliance lines. "Your Excellence, something is wrong with our formation," the tactical officer reported. "Our ships aren't responding properly to command signals." Emperor stared at his tactical display in growing horror. Imperial ships were turning on each other, their weapons firing at random targets within their own fleet. "We're being hacked," his communications officer announced. "Every ship's computer system is compromised." The human hackers had spent a year studying captured Imperial technology. Now they turned the Empire's own network against itself. Ships that had enslaved dozens of worlds found their own weapons targeting their former allies. Captain Lisa Park led the human squadron Freedom's Edge through the chaos of the Imperial formation. Her ships moved like dancers, using micro-FTL jumps to appear behind enemy vessels before vanishing again. Remember, she broadcast to her pilots, we're not trying to destroy every ship. We want as many crews alive as possible. This was the Alliance's secret weapon, not superior technology, but superior ideology. Every Imperial ship they captured meant more potential allies. Every Oran crew that surrendered was treated with mercy and shown what the Alliance offered. Commander, the former Imperial captain who had joined the humans after the first battle, led boarding parties onto disabled Imperial ships. His presence shocked Oran crews who had been told that defectors were executed. "Brothers," he said as he walked onto the bridge of the crippled cruiser Iron Dominion, "the humans offer what the Empire never did choice." "You're a traitor," Captain spat, but his voice lacked conviction. "I was a slave," replied, "just like all of us. We served an emperor who saw us as tools, not beings. The Alliance sees us as equals." Throughout the battle, similar scenes played out. Imperial crews found themselves treated with respect by the same primitives they had come to destroy. Many chose to surrender rather than fight for an empire that had never valued their lives. But Emperor had one final card to play. "Activate the planetary destroyer," he ordered. The final authority began charging its ultimate weapon, a gravitational device designed to tear planets apart from the inside. If he couldn't defeat the Alliance fleet, he would destroy Earth itself and break their spirit. "Your Excellence," his science officer protested, "the radiation from a destroyed planet will kill everything in this system, including our own forces." "Better to rule over ash than to lose to primitives," the Emperor snarled. As the massive weapon powered up, alarms sounded throughout the Alliance fleet, but Admiral had been expecting this. "All ships execute Operation Last Stand," she ordered. The Alliance fleet didn't retreat. Instead, they accelerated directly toward the Imperial superdreadnought. Thousands of ships from hundreds of worlds charged toward certain death to protect the of freedom. "They're all targeting us," the Imperial tactical officer screamed, "every ship in their fleet." The charge of the Alliance fleet became legend. Crystal ships that sparkled like jewels, hive cluster biovessels that pulsed with organic light, converted human cargo ships crewed by volunteers, and warships from dozens of other species, all racing toward the final authority with everything they had. The first wave of Alliance ships struck the Imperial superdreadnought's shields like a tidal wave of metal and energy. The shields held, but barely. "Planetary destroyer at 90% charge," the weapons officer reported. That's when the second wave hit. Captain Maria Santos of the converted freighter New Hope led 300 civilian vessels in the most desperate kamikaze attack in military history. Ships that had carried grain and manufactured goods now carried nuclear explosives and determination. "For Earth, for freedom, for the future," Santos screamed as her ship pierced the Imperial shields and detonated against the superdreadnought's hull. The explosion started a chain reaction. One by one, Alliance ships rammed into the final authority, each blast weakening its structure further. Emperor watched his ultimate weapon slowly die under an avalanche of sacrifice. "Planetary destroyer offline," the weapons officer reported. "Hull breaches on all decks, life support failing." Emperor looked around his destroyed bridge at the few surviving officers. Through the smoke and sparks, he could see Alliance ships surrounding his vessel, but they weren't firing. "Incoming transmission," the communications officer croaked. Admiral appeared on the main screen. Behind her stood representatives of every species in the Alliance, beings the Empire had enslaved, beings the Empire had threatened, beings who had chosen freedom over security. "Emperor," she said, "your empire is finished. Your fleets are destroyed or have joined us. Your worlds are free. You have one choice left." "I will not surrender to primitives," he snarled. "You're not surrendering to primitives," Admiral replied. "You're surrendering to equals. The Alliance offers you what you never offered others, the chance to change, to grow, to become part of something better than an empire built on oppression. Around the emperor, his remaining officers were removing their weapons and laying them on the deck. One by one, they walked away from their posts and toward the airlock where Alliance Marines waited. "Your own people are abandoning you," continued. "Not because they're cowards, but because they've seen what we offer: freedom, equality, and the chance to build instead of destroy." Emperor stood alone on his bridge, ruler of nothing but smoke and wreckage. Through the viewports, he could see ships from hundreds of worlds working together to rescue survivors from the battle. Former enemies helping former slaves. The conquered teaching their former conquerors. "The Empire is dead," he whispered. "The Empire is dead," Admiral agreed, "but you don't have to die with it." 5 years later, former Emperor walked through the gardens of New Geneva, the capital of the Free Worlds Alliance. He moved slowly, still adjusting to life without the weight of empire on his shoulders. The therapy had been difficult, learning to see other beings as equals rather than subjects, understanding that true strength came from cooperation, not domination. But the human counselors had been patient, and the former slaves had been unexpectedly forgiving. A voice called behind him. He turned to see Admiral, now Secretary General of the Alliance. She looked older, marked by the years of war and peace that had followed, but her eyes still held the same determination that had defeated an empire. "Sarah," he replied. It had taken 3 years before he could use her first name. "How are the new worlds adapting?" "Better than expected. The former Imperial core worlds are contributing mining equipment to the Outer Rim territories. The hive clusters are sharing their biological technology to help heal war-damaged planets. They are teaching crystal-growing techniques to anyone who wants to learn." They walked together through gardens tended by beings from dozens of different worlds. Children of former enemies played together, while their parents worked on projects that would have been impossible under Imperial rule. "I still don't understand it," said quietly. "How did you know?" "Know what?" "That this would work, that beings could choose cooperation over conquest." Admiral smiled. "Because humans had to learn the same lesson. We spent thousands of years fighting ourselves before we figured out that we were stronger together. When your empire arrived, we simply extended that lesson to the rest of the galaxy." Above them, ships from the Alliance fleet moved peacefully through space. Vessels that had once been enemies now worked together to explore new worlds, not to conquer them, but to invite their inhabitants to join the growing community of free peoples. "The Empire ordered Earth's submission," continued, "and got a war they couldn't withstand. But what you never expected was that you'd lose even when you won, because we weren't fighting for territory or resources. We were fighting for an idea." "What idea?" "That freedom is worth dying for, and more importantly, that it's worth living for." As the twin suns of New Geneva set behind the mountains, the former emperor and the former admiral watched ships from across the galaxy dock at the orbital stations above. Each ship brought new stories, new ideas, new possibilities for a future that neither empire nor humanity could have built alone. The galaxy had learned that the most dangerous enemies aren't those with superior technology or overwhelming numbers. The most dangerous enemies are those who fight not just with weapons, but with hope. And hope, as every tyrant in history had learned too late, was the one thing that no empire could ever truly defeat.